Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of arts, where we do deep dives into deep cuts and help you understand why damn things matter. I'm your host, Novo Day, and today we're going to be talking about art and drama, audio and acting, exploring the world of voiceover acting, or voice acting and narration. But instead of focusing on a specific piece or an artist of the past, it's time, guys, we start focusing on our peers, our colleagues, and our contemporaries. And there is no better person to do this with than with one of our very own, one of our regulars, and that is with Mr. Philip Church. Now, before I introduce Mr. Philip Church, I need to give you the background that you guys so much deserve. You've heard him on the show before, but today we need to give him the spotlight. So Mr. Church is based out of Atlanta, Georgia. He's been in the game for 10 years, and he includes singing, improv comedy, and has an incredible love for film, music, and literature. That's exactly why he's been a regular on the show for so long. Now, of course, you've probably have heard many times us talk about the fact that he is the voiceover talent for my novel, the audiobook version. He played Tybalt in the Entropy Sessions, but you could also hear him as the titular Everett Akasha in the young adult sci-fi series about Everett Akasha by Justin Dawkins, and most recently, Tendrils. He was the co-lead protagonist, John Vine, by Kevin Candela. Mr. Church, now it's time. Now it's time to connect. Mr. Church, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you are very, very welcome. Now, today's going to be a little interview, guys.
It's a little different.
It's going to be a little different because we need to start shining that spotlight on some different people. So we're going to start with my very first question for you. And obviously with that intro, we kind of know where you are today. You are in voiceover, voice acting, narration, but tell the good people what led you down this path. How did you decide to go into voiceover work? How do we get here?
Excellent question. And I feel like when you tell people that you do voice work, it's a pretty common question because it's an interesting thing to think about. I particularly have never liked pictures, video of me, etc. Yet I've also had this weird balance of being a little shy of too much spotlight, but definitely having a need to entertain. And all the way back from, heck, even like kindergarten, like really, really young, I tried things like being in plays and kind of acting, but again, I didn't love it that much, and went on to more being like into music and learning about musicality, and played in bands and stuff. And that much, it was better because, at least in the actual band that I played in, I was not the front man, and I could really just kind of provide backing vocals and some guitar. I did do some like cover shows for a little bit too, but since again, it wasn't original material, I felt confident in my ability to do, just other people's good songs on an acoustic guitar in a duo, by the way. There was somebody else there. He would sing a little bit, but I was still kind of the quote unquote front man of the two. But just something about not having my actual work be scrutinized made that doable for me. And I went on to try improv comedy as well. I did enjoy that, but again, something about the whole being on stage, it was just so nerve-wracking and made me too anxious to where I didn't feel like I was really getting the best of what I maybe had to offer. And eventually came to realize through basically just kind of a random suggestion of, hey, have you ever thought about audiobooks? And I was like, my gosh, I haven't. But it combines all the things where, I can do public speaking. I've done public speaking both personally, but a lot in other like sort of professional roles that I've had. I have done music and had the spotlight in that way. I've entertained via dramatics. I've always loved doing impersonations and coming up with fun character voices and just being kind of a goof when need be. And
it's definitely an art.
Yeah, and it's just at the intersection of all of these things is cool. I can tell stories. I can entertain. I can create characters. I can continue to grow and provide art and value to the world, but not have to feel like I'm being stared at or being overly scrutinized. In that, of course, people will still sit there and it's not that there's no critiques involved, but there's just something about it being a little less direct, of just having one step or one medium removed of it being purely audio, that made me really comfortable and gave me the ability to, lean into, whether it's a dramatic moment, a comedic moment, or just plain old exposition in which you're still, whether you're in a narrator type of character or it's more of a first person type of narration where, the narrator is an actual character from the book. It's where I've found myself the most comfortable and happy in trying to, again, just bring entertainment to the people, to the world at large.
Do you feel like the profession chose you? You know that old saying, sometimes you don't pick the thing picks you.
Yeah, that's actually, that could really be it. The fact that it was just kind of maybe waiting its turn in line. I kept looking elsewhere and trying this, trying that, and I liked certain things about all of it. And yeah, again, just this interesting niche that was, again, the combination of all these things, with maybe the exception of like singing, but still, it helps because having musicality and understanding tones still can help you, of course, to create characters and
Oh
deliver
yeah,
lines in a certain way, as
it's very
opposed to,
musical.
and as opposed to just being monotone, of just being aware of the actual tone, my pacing, all these things. It's, in a way, it's still musical. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's I would say that, if anything, audiobooks really kind of brought it to me and gave something to me that I didn't know that I was really missing.
And you've stayed in the game ever since then. So when tell the good people, when did you break into the industry then?
Yeah, now that 2022's almost over, it's definitely been, I think, 10 years almost
Like
exactly.
officially? Oh wow.
Yeah, and it's,
Yeah.
yes, because it's wild to think about that, and I it's not a ton. I'm not trying to, like, big up myself or, be.
He's flexing,
I'm not
guys.
I'm not Johnny Big Potatoes over here. But I would say I've done, I think, nearly 30 books or something.
Nice. Yeah. So
All in all,
you're very seasoned. You feel pretty comfortable at this point.
yeah, I'm maybe not quite veteran status, but I'm far from a novice to where, as far as even my own production setup and the ability to fully produce professional sounding books from home, or to even provide audio to professional studios for their own purposes,
Yeah.
I'm quite comfortable and confident in where I'm currently at.
And what draws you to a project? Do you like the traditional just voiceover work or voice acting? And tell the good people probably the difference if they may not know.
Yeah, there's so many more types of voiceover than tends to come to mind.
Than just voice acting.
Yeah, even people who have begun to dabble or look into it sometimes forget just how wide-ranging it can be. Voice acting, I would say, is more like your world of fiction to an extent. Not that there's not acting to other parts of just regular voiceover, but voiceover can be almost anything, whether you're talking about the Ford truck commercial, on the high level, or the more local scale of the
Or
guy
mind
talking
the
about.
gap in the subway kind of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. There's so many different types of it. So, I mean, I'm more on the voice actor type, in that I am creating and embodying characters from people's fiction work.
Mhm.
I'm not against doing the other type. I just find that that's what draws me more, in that I want fiction. I want to explore where I can go. I'm not pleased with this reality that I've been given, so I want to live in another one for a little bit and help take people into that as with me. Again, just that, right? I mean, that's the whole point of reading, as well as other certain hobbies, is escapism to an extent. And so I think voice acting and audiobooks in particular have given me more of an avenue to be escapist and go down a rabbit hole, as compared to, yeah, again, being a radio ad voice, or a local commercial kind of guy, or the person who says, press 1 for English, or, el número dos para español.
You would be good at that too, though.
I could be. Again, there's there's
Yeah.
there's so many that it would it's there, you don't find jacks of all trades in voice work. You really don't. People find a wheelhouse and they might go to a couple of different avenues, but for the most part, there's so much out there that once you find your area or two, you tend to kind of get, firmly planted there, and you're lucky to be able to expand that much more. But that's at least where I've been happy
So,
this
and
time
there's,
around.
I mean, there is a thin line even from, voice acting to narration too. When you're working with people, do you normally tend to trend towards when you literally are the character and you're not just reading the story like the character would be, right? You're actually acting out the roles, correct?
If that's what the role calls for, the various writing styles, have you address where sometimes you are the omniscient narrator, you're not truly a person, you were just a being sharing a story. There are
Mhm.
times where it is maybe the protagonist, but it is also happening in real time, so there is that reactionary take, that having to act in the moment, and then there's times where similarly, it's still the protagonist, but it's more of a they know where the story's going, and they're being a bit coy and maybe doing foreshadowing, so
Mm.
even that in alone, just being the narrator in itself, there's so many different ways that that can be presented according to the text and what the author's goal is, so that even the narrator in itself is a very much a character, and you have to decide. And again, often depending on how connected you are with
Like
the
what kind of
author of
voice
the
you want
book.
to use just for them.
Yeah, again, is the narrator, if it's a real person, are they the excited type? Is this that is it more jovial and friendly, or are they extremely sardonic and bummed out because this is
Mm.
a very dramatic tale or something? So, it's even from the get go, just because there's not quotations and a character voice to attach to it, there's still a lot of thought that needs to go into the delivery of every little bit, because every piece of that is very important. And, even the author had something in mind when they were writing that sentence of how it should be sort of delivered and formulated and to be thought about.
Yeah. So that's a good segue to how do you prepare for a gig or a part or a series of parts? Obviously some novels or pieces of work have a very small number of characters, and then probably there's you've had to work with pieces that have had a large number of characters. How do
Yeah.
you traverse those waters? What's your process?
When I'm lucky, I get a lot of contact with the author, and those, of course, those relationships are so important. Help them, of course, again, bring their work to a proper medium that to be shared with other people. If they have an actual list of characters alone, that helps, because that gives you first and foremost an idea of how many voices do you need to be creating and bringing.
Do
And
you
on
like that, or do you feel do you cringe at like when you see, "Oh god, I have to I have to figure out 30 voices," or is that like a fun challenge for you?
It's a bit of both, I think, because again, it comes down to is this a fantasy or sci-fi novel? Are all these people humans in the same city? Are these different characters at least across or from various parts of a country, or various countries in general? Is it even in our regular Earth or reality? Which again, if you start to talk about different creatures and species of things, then you can really start to have fun with it. So again, it's sometimes it can be cringeable because you're like, holy crap, this is nothing but like, there's like half of the character is a bunch of corporate dudes, and you just, how do I sound like 15 angry white men that are
How do I
distinguishable
sound like a
from one
bunch of
another?
suits in a room?
Yeah, like
Jesus
how,
Christ.
but
Yeah.
distinguishable from one another, right? And so
Yeah.
it can be difficult, but it's still, more often than not, it is a fun challenge. And then, even just past whether they have a list, sometimes they will or won't describe each character if there's a list. And there's not even always a list. Sometimes people don't have those materials that might not have been part of their writing process, which is totally fine. So if they don't
What
have
do you
that,
prefer on that note? Do you like the
yeah, I
lists,
mean,
or do you like to just exploring it with the fellow artist, kind of being not literally in the same room, but on the Zoom call, in the meeting to figure it out? What do you prefer?
if I get to sync up with the author and they happen to have a list, cool. Otherwise, it really is just me doing all my homework and perusing the entire book and making sure to not only make note of the various characters, but especially pay attention to things about that one or two times when their voice is described as sultry or gruff, or even just specifics, the word accent, twang, dialect, just the various ways that you can describe a voice. It can be a bit harder because, there's always a turnaround, there's always a deadline. And I've been to where I've had a very, very large book with a certain number of characters, and I maybe missed like one key word, and it wound up impacting the overall project timeline,
Oh,
which wasn't a
wow.
great look. Yeah, so that was like a really hard learning process, and that was luckily one of my more rookie mistakes earlier on in my career. So, I mean, I've since learned from that. So, yeah, I mean, if you have to learn it from your own perusal of the book before you really start, then, that's cool, but it's still not perfect because you can easily miss something. There's sometimes very small ancillary characters that maybe they don't even have much of a description. So you still, you get 3/4 of the way through the book, and all of a sudden there's somebody for just 2 pages, and you still need to come up with something that doesn't sound like anything else that you have done or know that you will need to do for the remainder of the book. So you'll almost always come across some sort of surprise or something that will alter what you thought you were going to do. But yeah, I mean, the more I can go into it knowing, the the better I feel like, kind of like anything else, right? What is that saying about 2 minutes of preparation saves 1 minute of execution or something like that? And it's very much still true here as far as being able to prep the number of characters, the feel of each chapter or the sections of a chapter where, again, the plot is ratcheting up, start to display more excitement, maybe a few more decibels of volume, or, look forward to the somber moments to, dialing it back down, and, maybe kind of leaning into the mic and getting a little quieter for a really tense moment, or
Yeah.
just whatever it is.
I
There's
felt the tenseness right
Yeah.
there. I did. Yeah.
So, yeah, there's so many things that both can be done beforehand, and then things that I feel like are fairly inevitable that will have to be done during. But yeah, I really prefer to learn as much as possible before I ever even start recording, and the more I can know it going into it, the better I think I'll feel throughout making some sort of, especially like audiobooks. Yeah.
What is still a challenge to you then to this day? Where is the when do you feel like, oh man, this is gonna be hard,
I think just making each character
unique?
clearly distinct and yet still believable, because it can be difficult to not wander into caricature practically. Because as a guy with not exactly a deep voice, but it's not high, right? I'm just kind of right there in the middle. I
You
have
have a
like
good register of
Yeah, I've got
that
like a pretty every
deep
guy. It can get
middle.
it can get a bit, yeah, it's maybe towards the lower end of middle. So
Yeah,
I for instance don't like how my female voices can come across as a guy just
sure.
kind of throwing a story out there, and you're just talking
Like
like,
you said,
"Oh,
caricature.
yeah,
It
like
can
blah, blah,
come
blah, this
off
chick
kind
on
of
the
off.
subway, blah, blah, blah." So, no, you don't wanna sound like you're just doing a throwaway voice.
Sure.
You need to do this consistently, and so you have to find that pocket of, "Okay, is this at least believable? And can I do this consistently based throughout various, again, emotions and tones?" Um, because adding different things like a bit of a different mouth form to kinda, just maybe change a little bit of the speech pattern, like whether they speak more out of one side of their mouth or they don't move their jaw very much or something. All those little tricks still come in handy, but, if I'm raising the pitch of my voice, it's always going to sound like a dude doing an impression of a lady, and again, I just don't want that to sound silly and take away some of that fourth wall. I want to keep, the listeners in the moment and make sure that I'm never accidentally downplaying or taking away from a good dramatic moment, an important line with them just being like, "Wow, this guy sounds goofy. He doesn't sound like a lady at all." It's like, I know that I don't, but I also, again, I can't sound like an actual cartoon. This isn't animation. I'm not doing a cartoon, especially just given that a lot of roles are very serious or have their dramatic moments. And so, yeah, maintaining that seriousness is, I think, is still just my ongoing challenge of, I can explore the ranges of my voice, but I hate the idea of my specifically my female characters just sounding like a poor imitation.
And I think you answered probably my next question, which is let's try to dissect the true art in this art form, because I'm very happy we have this professional relationship now, because you really helped to open my eyes with the fact that this is such a skill set and such an art, more than I realized. I already knew going into a lot of my pursuits that this was clearly an art form, but getting to know someone like you, I felt like, man, this is why there's such a small community of people that can really nail it really well. And I still think about things to this day of like, oh, well, Philip could say it so much better. Or, like I was thinking, even when we were doing shows like Bekchinsky, and I was like, I would, we've done shows where I was like, Philip, say it again, and say it again.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, say it again so I can edit it in, and it just really made me realize, okay, this community of artists is so unique, and we need to shine more of a light, I think, in the art form in and of itself too, and I just love that. Yeah, I finally really feel like I have that dichotomy of, and you're so humble, I know you don't want to put it like, yeah, not everyone can do what I do, but there is some truth to that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that's another thing too, is not letting things get to your head in any sort of capacity like this, because from what I've learned and learning from others in this industry is that this is not your Hollywood multi-million dollar role. Like none of that really almost ever applies anything close to it to voiceover, so much that, not saying that those same people can't sometimes do voiceover and they might be the exception to that, but yeah, I mean, it's not, again, that's kind of the other side of that same coin of, I'm not in as much of a spotlight, and therefore there's not as much of that sort of like clout. There's
Yeah.
not all that grandioseness. And again, I think that the more you can remind yourself that without having your physicality, you have to be all that much better with just the
Yeah.
one instrument. And so reminding yourself to never stop stretching, never stop learning is probably that humbling thing that kind of keeps me going, of saying the next one's got to be better. It's not that I'm displeased with the last one, but it's just that strive, as opposed to being like, well, hey, whatever,
Yeah, ever
whatever happens.
evolving.
Yeah, it's like, oh, and again, there's no like writers or like specific contracts to where, you've got people that, again, in certain Hollywood roles, like, well, at least I'll definitely make $35,000, from, it's like, that's just not a thing. You just don't get that sort of cockiness. Like there's people with great voices that know that they'll book, but
Yeah.
still, like, there's only so much that people tend to make in both audiobooks and just voiceover in general. And I think that that's another interesting part of this side of entertainment compared to, again, like the people who are on stage in front of a mic or on a set in front of a camera and mics.
Well, you make a good, to your point, you have to you have to bring your A game, because yeah, there isn't that visual component, but I realized as we've been discussing this, you have to create the visual component in that vocal performance, and
Yeah.
that can go such a long way, and in bringing that person in the world, because yeah, we're so used to having the visual, seeing a film or TV show where there's a
Yeah.
visual component, and
They pull a
so
face, they lean towards a
right.
certain character. There's so many subtle things that kind of get lost or get practically taken for granted.
But when you like create a voice, that person hearing that voice can still try to imagine what he or she looks like. So there is a visual component that you're helping to create, but just with their imagination.
Very
So
true.
that's yeah.
Very theater of the mind.
So let's switch gears. Let's go to the other end of the art form spectrum. Let's talk about gear. Let's gear out a little bit. What do you like to use? And when you are constructing a piece from beginning, middle, and end, kind of walk us through that and discuss your gear along the way.
Sure. I have a number of acoustic
He's got a
treatments.
fort. I've seen the fort, guys.
Yeah. I've got a number of acoustic treatments. That is super mandatory, because it doesn't matter how good of a microphone, how much you want to drop on a microphone. If you don't have the right environment, you're going to capture exactly what your environment sounds like, more than your ability to, again, draw people away from reality, or at least draw them into whatever narrative that you're trying to paint, depending on if we're talking more voice acting or even just voiceover. Always gonna have tons of acoustic treatment around me. I still use a dynamic microphone, but just because it's still a pretty good one. It's not a condenser, but that's probably would be my next step. Is just that I do wonder if I would want to switch microphones. So I still use the Shure SM7B, and you'll see that in tons of other professional recordings though. Like, go watch, like, for instance, one of my favorite, and by favorite I mean really the only like Let's Play that I watch on YouTube. I don't watch a ton of video game
Do
streaming.
they still call them that for the
I don't
record?
know. It's just the fact that the one
I
that
feel
the one that I watch was always described as a Let's Play because it was
Yeah.
3 friends.
I
and
still call them Let's Play, but I'm like, do they still even?
yeah, as far as I know,
the geriatric
yeah.
millennial in me?
It could be, and because that's probably one of the many things we have in common. Because that's as far as I know. But even in other things like the It's Always Sunny podcast,
Yeah.
and even other like news-based podcasts that aren't fully, not like your super big names of like major media outlets, but the more amateur ones. But these podcasts that have video components to them, I love seeing that they're using a Shure SM7B, and then also being able to also sit there and go like, yeah, they sound really good, and I know for a fact that I'm working with something that is professional, like studio grade. So again, like, yeah, you can always go out there and spend $2,000 to $5,000 on a microphone. But it also depends on like, what's the actual purpose? I mean, are you doing theatricals? Are you going to have a range of volumes? Are you going to be
So
doing
the
multiple
gear is
characters?
important,
It is.
and
It
what the
really is
product's going
important.
to be. Okay.
And then outside of that, just your standard stuff. Like it needs to have an interface, and what that is essentially a little box that translates the plain sort of audio signal into an actual computer signal, and then takes that into my like MacBook. And I'm still a Pro Tools guy. It's just what I've always used because the first few places that I worked with were Pro Tools houses.
I think it's still a very, the gold standard
Yeah.
with a lot of, workstations.
Yeah. And then for the other end of things too, for listening, I've got a set of Sony, what is it, like MD? I'm going to take them off. MDR V6. So just
We got some sound effects in there for this episode. Yeah, I heard it.
Decent Sony cans, full over ear. And
Good,
that
yeah.
way, they're made for music and they're made for just rich audio. So that way you get the headphone version of what you sound like with good quality. And then I've got some 3-inch monitors, a set of stereo 3-inch monitors. Granted, stereo is just really for my own leisure when I'm listening to music, but still knowing what it would sound like on speakers, because, people listen to audio in so many places these days. It's not just like everybody has the one radio at home. No, I mean, this is, you've got your phone, and some people will listen right off of that. You've got all the various types of earbuds, your AirPods and whatnot. Then you have people that also love closed back, full on headsets. I mean, those people still exist, even though I still feel like everything is earbuds these days. And then you've got the people with their own home stereos and people in their cars going through Bluetooth to listen on like big speakers. So you need that for sure to listen both ways, so that if you are doing a full production, including mastering it, you need to be listening for those weird niche frequencies that, like, well, when I listen on my speakers where there's more bass, I really hear too much rumble. So maybe I'll cut a little more of this low frequency out, and then go back and listen to that with the headphones and make sure that it doesn't sound extra high frequency or any kind of tinny. And you just kind of play off the balance of both of them, because that's really all you can do. Is you're making the one finished product for however people are going to be listening to it. So it's all the more important that you have at least the two. So decent cans and some pretty decent monitors. Again, nothing like crazy high end, but enough to know that when I put the final stamp on everything and send it out into the world, that people are getting the absolute best out of what I'm capable of making.
I feel like this end is an art form as well. There is an art to making sure that, not necessarily having the best gear, but helping to create the best performance, so that the best goes in, and then you can have the best coming out, and then you can do that post-production work. Speak a little to that.
Yeah, the post stuff is far heavier than I would imagine most people that don't have any kind of experience with, I guess, just media production in general. That, yes, so much of it, obviously, yes, you've got the narrator sitting there for 15 hours, that once they're done, maybe it gets shaved down to more like 13 and a half, something like that, of a finished run. But yeah, I mean, making sure that the editing is good and consistent, that no sentences, just because the narrator needed to pause and take a breath, that might not be the best for that beat in the story. So even the people, not even behind the mic and then post record, still need to be evaluating, what should the pacing be here? And then even just other random things like, identifying scene breaks where, like you're reading a book and then all of a sudden, whether there's like a line or two asterisks, like a large space between two paragraphs, that obviously indicates some kind of scene shift, so that like that needs its own spacing specifically so that people will understand, like, okay, a couple of seconds of silence have gone by. And that way, when the book picks back up, it's like, yeah, you're not at all on the same tack. You've changed lanes. And so paying attention to both mandatory things like that, scene, the pacing of a different scene, and then just looking out for, again, like the various frequencies of just knowing, okay, well, this book, they decided on these types of characters. We'll need to make sure that, it never hits certain levels, because it might end up sounding too rough coming out of speakers, depending on the kind of voices you do, or depending on, if you have to have far more low-end voices or not. There's a lot of know-how that goes into polishing up any good performance, that it's just as important to post, if not almost, well, I would say, yeah, equally, just against apples and oranges, really.
What are you working on right now? Anything new in the oven?
Not anything at the actual moment in record, but I do have 2 books that I already sent in corrections and stuff for, so they'll be, I guess published is still the right word, or just released. So I do have 2 books coming out soon. One of
Are we allowed to talk about them, or is it still hush hush?
No, we can. We can talk about it just fine. One interesting thing too is that again, in this medium where you don't have a face to put to a name, like for instance, people who, like actors, usually like transition into, for instance, like maybe they did some riskier stuff when they were younger and they were not quite family men, and then you get older and you do almost, like Eddie Murphy, for instance, how he used to do almost nothing, but like he could be so raunchy and foul-mouthed, and then once he be kind of, he became like a family man, and
he was the nutty professor.
Yeah, and his performances started to, and not saying that he didn't do the occasional thing here and there where he maybe would drop an F-bomb or get kind of crass, but he became softer in his age, and that's fine. Well, that's not really the case here, in that you can do literally anything you want, but you still need to keep in mind things like, your sort of basically your marketability. And that if I've done children's books, which I have, I probably wouldn't want my real name on that children's book to be in the same list as like some erotica, for instance. That might be off-putting. So other interesting things that you need to keep in mind are, like I've done both ends of that. And so one of the books that I've done recently was a little more on the erotica end, and I did not attach the name Philip Church to it intentionally. So a lot of narrators have pseudonyms for various reasons, not even just around erotica. It's just, again, maybe their nonfiction work or their corporate narration, if you will.
Yeah.
Whatever sort of way more of a straight read, informational, that still might be like a different name, because it's just a different body and style of work compared to if they happen to do dramatic, theatrical, whatever you want to call it, like more like fiction work. Just to be able to separate those personas and let people know that, well, if you're looking for corporate, you're going to want to hire, Tommy Teach'em, like whatever the heck you call it. I don't know, it's dumb, but it would probably be a real name.
Nope. I'm going to call you Tommy Teach'em in a future episode.
If I ever do corporate narration, I'm going to have to go by Tommy Teach'em now.
You got to go. It's Tommy Teach'em.
Know that, like, if that's what you're marketing to corporations, that like, cool, as long as they Google that and they'll find that you're good and consistent with that, and that they won't accidentally find out that like, oh, and he went and ripped the bodice off and her flesh. It's like, no, you don't need those things commingling. You don't probably want those on the same resume.
So, pro tip: pseudonym.
Yeah.
For the budding next generation of voiceover artists, what other kind of wisdom can you bestow upon them?
Genuinely tell them to sit down and actually record themselves, and then just ask friends and family to listen and see, are you even comfortable asking people close to, because I mean, those people are always going to
There is performance anxiety.
There is, and
probably a lot of people out there.
And more often than not, people,
and you got to deliver.
That, and the people close to you will also want to support you, and you got to consider the fact that you're not on mic, but still, do you want people to really be scrutinizing your voice? Like, is it still going to get to you just because you're not on a camera? And can you, like, how do you actually feel about the sound of your own voice? And then even just another weird thing of just, do you think you could legitimately like read out loud for for a certain number of hours almost every day for at least a short period of time, because again, books are only really so long, luckily. Unless you're talking about you have an entire series to do and you're somehow booking all of them at once,
Hmm.
you're still going to need
Does
time.
that happen? Oh my god.
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes,
Oh.
because think about how many books
So
already
you're like committing to like years
you can be,
sometimes. Okay,
absolutely.
wow.
Because,
Okay.
audiobooks have really boomed over the last decade, and so there were so many existing properties that like, "Hey, this author already has a backlog of 10, but they're still going, but we need to start doing these." And so sometimes, they'll say, "Well, I want that consistency." That author might decide, "I want the same person. Find me somebody amazing because 'cause they're gonna do the 10 books, and,
They're gonna
by the
kill it
and then by the end of
continually.
the 10, I might want them to do the remainder because I only have, like, 2 more under this franchise that I've planned."
Hmm.
So there's like, you need to legitimately be able to do this for just almost the same amount of time as a normal 9 to 5 to an extent, with the main difference that if you sit down and talk for 8 hours a day, you are going to sound like dog shit by the end of it. You need to find your pocket of, okay, I'm awake, I'm hydrated, my voice is woken up, and my brain is going, and I can perform. And then make sure that you can also stop and hear yourself, that even if you feel like you are the juices are flowing, you've got the pace, everything's great, of being able to stop and go, do I still sound like me? Am I the same narrator that I was 4 hours ago?
That makes me think of a question that I didn't even have to begin with. Do you warm up? Do you do exercises? Do you do things to keep it sharp like a muscle?
I love singing. I sing every day. I have various stuff. I mean, I'm still singing Steely Dan songs. And then I'm still on like
Plug for our Steely Dan
yeah, and I'm
show.
still on like a Julian Casablancas kick with a few songs,
There you go.
and
Yeah, man.
and even if it's just other random stuff, if I put on a different playlist, yeah, so that's one thing, is it doesn't have to, there's no one correct way to warm up, so much as just keeping your instrument at the ready, especially if you intend to perform and do it fully professionally as intend it to be a recording. So, yeah, a lot of times people will just tell you that, like, it's more of a, like, I sing to warm up, and that is me. I do that. I will somewhat practice accents if I know that a book is gonna call for them. So I will do what I can to, like, okay, let me try it cold, just like surprise myself and be like, okay, let me just do, like, I'll just do like a really Cockney accent out of nowhere. Let me just go with a
Mhm.
random Australian, or let me go back to Scottish now. And then sometimes I'll also practice, like, what if I were to jump between them and just
I
try
want
to
to be a fly on that wall
yeah,
now.
right. Again, it's that's the thing, is like, it's nice that it's usually just me here by myself. So if I feel silly, there's no one here to you know, oh, they're laughing at me. Like, that's part of why this is so great for me, because I'm having these goofy conversations with myself, trying to just make it up as I go, switching in and out of voices, and trying also not to do, stereotypical of like, oh, if you do an Australian accent, try not to sound, well, I don't know. There's not that many famous specific Aussie voices, but you know how, like, sometimes people will almost do, again, like a specific impression when they're trying to do an accent, and it's like, well, no, this book doesn't call for, Sean Connery or whatever Scott, and Sean Connery's not even
Or
is this
Crocodile Dundee, like that's
exactly, and
that's
and
like
like
a go-to impression. Jesus Christ.
yeah, it's like, don't just do an impression. Like, try to use your actual character voice and do not just a stereotypical version of that accent, but a corrector version of that accent, and jump in and out of them, because you will be going from Scottish person, they said, to lady Scottish person, she said, to regular narration. And whether that's Scottish or not, again, like, that also comes down to, has the book established that, is this an omniscient narrator? They can sound like you. That's okay if you're an American like me. Or, if you are that dang good at accents, you can book something where the entire book is even presented as like, oh, this is all British. It's going to be arranged, but the narrator is just going to be your, like, your basic BBC News. Like, we just want like a really straight narrator, super plain, and that way the rest of your, various regional England accents can shine.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, just thinking about singing alone just to get my various bits of range and make sure I'm warmed up, and especially if it's multiple characters, and I've even if the text doesn't say, that's another fun thing, is getting to use that creative license. So again, I might inject a bit of an accent into a character to help me distinguish. Like I said earlier, I was joking about having like 15 white men, But, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing I run across, to where that if it's not
That would be
established.
a challenge,
Yeah,
yeah.
if it's not established in the text that, is anyone even not like a regular white dude? Like, who are these people? And even beyond that, like, are they actually from the same city, or is at least one of them from the Midwest, if not like a specific area of the Midwest or New England or the Southwest or whatever? Those are the only other things you can do, is to maybe start to inject dialects and various subtle accents on the top of, yes, you can pitch your voice up. You can make it a little gravelly, like a little airy, or a little more nasally. Like, you have to find all these different niche things, and of course keep track of them in your head, um, and be able to do that. So yeah, there's a lot of different things, just depending on the book. If you're doing audiobooks, or just, the performance, if you're just doing one character for a voiceover, if you're, doing, whether it's a commercial sort of character voice of like, oh, I'm playing the mascot of this thing and they're kind of goofy and silly, or, a cartoon where it's like, well, I'm playing a big turtle, but they're not actually, like, they don't sound like all slow and dopey. Again, just there's all these different things that you could prepare for. Just depends on what your current job gig calls for.
Excellent answer, my God. So let's talk about the Philip Church in 5 to 10 years. What would you like to achieve? And if there was a dream gig out there, what would that be for you?
In 5 to 10 years, I would love to have more of a local presence here in Atlanta.
Because we're putting
And
it in the out in the universe, so it could happen
it
once we
could.
put it out into the
You gotta
universe.
work towards these things and manifest them. If you don't say it out loud, if you
That's
don't ask
right.
for something, you can't get it.
That's right.
So yeah, I would like to continue to spread my influence, and I don't necessarily even need to be the voice, but I've found myself enjoying just directing and, again, doing the production, since I've actually produced plenty of my own books. So I wouldn't mind having a reliable sort of like local quote unquote studio, if you will, so that other people in my local community, at least, or even traveling people in the community, would be able to say like, oh, I'm in this area. Does somebody have a studio I can book? And I can step in as at least an engineer, as well as to be able to rent the space. If not, also a director. If they're like, well, well, what kind of role is this? Do you need, more creative hands on this than just, or do you have it? So to be able to offer the full gamut, even in the event that
One-stop shop.
yeah, because, you'll still find that tons of these people that do voice work have a hand in production. Again, like, you've invested all these things in your studio. A lot of people don't have that luxury. And you've gotta realize, like, how marketable you are, and just all the different things that you bring as your own sort of small business in a way. And that's one thing that I still feel like Atlanta's so big and spread out, so that if people in my local, like, suburb area, or wherever I may be living at the time, whether it's just being able to market locally and helping small businesses and being able to provide voiceover for them, or that, again, another narrator, voice talent, whoever needs a space for a few days and I don't have an active gig, I can at least say, here's a space. Do you have an engineer? Do you want to self-engineer? Do you need
Hmm.
me to engineer? And just continue to let art make it out to the world.
So, oh yeah, like have a space and it be completely flexible to the needs of the situation.
Yeah.
In other words, are we? Do we have that now, or are we developing that?
Developing that. I would say that the hardware's there, but the space really just is not. This is not I'm not currently in a space that I would feel too comfortable, having another professional really, like, try to sell them on, like.
So we need that studio.
Yeah, it's not a true studio. Again, it's treated acoustically and the gear is there, and it works for me.
Sure.
And, maybe, like, if a close friend was wanting to do something again, like, oh, like, I know some people that run their own small businesses. So if they really were like, "Hey, I just literally wanna voice my own commercial spot. Can I make, like, a 60-minute spot with you?" Cool. Like, if you're my friend and you know what you're getting for the fact that you'd probably also get just, like, a charged a friend price, neato.
Yeah.
But the rates that some of these things go for, and the fact that, like, for however much more they could probably go get, like, the Mac Daddy of suites, or, like, if it is like, oh, this is a big, like, huge Macmillan or whatever, the bigger publishers, then, they might not be looking for, like, a small, sort of at-home studio. They might just want to go into, like, a larger room with the fanciest mic possible, and just know that, like, sky's the limit.
Tell the good people how they can book you then, because they may be listening to this in the future. It may be 20 25. I don't know.
Yeah,
And they're
you
like,
never
oh
know.
shit, I need this guy for this exact purpose. How did they get a hold of you?
My website, philipchurch.tech, is the best way. I chose tech because, again, I am just a bit nerdier, and I figured it might kind of stand out a little more. Plus, all the CHs in like philipchurch.tech, I feel like that just helps. Like, it's got a specific ring to it. And it's got my commercial demo for, well, literally just commercial read type stuff. It's got a couple of my actual fiction audiobook samples on it. So if you're on the fence, the website's still the place to go. So you can hear more of me and get links to so many more of the works that I've done that are available through like Audible and other publishers. And there's also, of course, a contact form, right? That you'll just be able to send something into me to say, hey, the voice is right what we're thinking. And, it sounds like you can produce your own stuff, blah, 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 from what we read. So yeah, Philip Church with one L in Philip, philipchurch.tech.
One L Philip.
Yeah, but I also have a Facebook page. Again, it's easy and free to have like Facebook business page. So the two, of course, just link to each other, just like any other decent small business with an internet presence. So you can find me on Facebook, Philip Church, professional voice nerd. I believe is like what I call myself. But philipchurch.tech is still the most direct way to go. For now, just the voice, but someday hopefully actual like studio bookings and stuff.
We don't know when the good people are going to be listening to this. I don't know.
This is true.
So, one more question for you, a bonus question.
Ooh.
Let's talk inspiration, because and every artist has that moment where they saw somebody, or if they're a musician, it was a band or an artist. If they're an actor, they saw film and they were inspired by someone's chops. So for you, in the voiceover acting narration world, what are your go-tos? Two parts. What was some of the people that inspired you to actually get into this work, and what are the people that are still inspiring you today?
I think as a child of the 90s.
Ooh, The Simpsons.
Well, yeah, actually,
Dan
that is
Castellaneta.
a good one. Honestly, though, I was gonna say the Batman animated series.
Okay, yeah.
Both Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, those performances were above and beyond, both for the time and almost to this day. Hence, they both still do the roles to this day. It's almost hard to top what they brought to the table 30 years ago, literally, like back in, I think it was actually, it might have been a little more. It might have been 1990 exactly that Batman the Animated Series came out. And even just that realization, eventually, the damn Joker was Luke Skywalker. That alone blew me away about like, are you kidding me? Like, people can do that with their voices.
He's still in the industry, right? He's still doing
he is, exactly.
work.
He's a legend. I mean, he's done a lot more than just the Joker, of course. That just happens to be probably his just most famous role, because everybody loves a good Joker, right? But yeah, he's done all kinds. There was even a short that they did that was literally a play, like it was basically like a joke on how many different characters that he's done, and it was like he himself was Mark Hamill. He is playing first and foremost a cartoon version of himself, where he is Mark Hamill the actor, and then he's like 2 or 3 other characters from the various like comic book universe stuff that he's done. And it's basically just him being all of his different characters at once and just like getting to have like a fun time of it. It was just hilarious. And so, yeah, he still does it. And it's like, it's subtle. You might not have even realized like how many voices he might've done, just in cartoons. And not to mention like some
Metalocalypse and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that was the roots. And then or we could do both. Who was that man or woman, maybe during, or maybe someone new?
I don't know that anyone new has blown me away quite to the same level that some other people have. 2 of my favorites who happened to end up working together on one of my favorite shows of all time, which is Futurama, were also present throughout my younger life. And again, it wasn't until you had things like basically the internet and like your IMDb's where I just realized that Billy West was all over the place. You couldn't stop the guy just from he's just got decades and decades of work now. And every show that he's done, he's not just one person. He is so talented that he is never any less than like 2 or 3 characters on any one of these shows. So, like Ren and Stimpy, he was Ren and Stimpy. In Doug, he was like Doug and Roger Klotz, and I think like maybe one other character.
Yeah, we forget that, these actors and artists can embody hundreds of characters and change on a whim. I don't know, like going back to the Simpsons example, when I've seen someone like Dan or the other actors just switch from voice to voice to voice to voice to voice, it's like magic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, kinda like I was joking about with my warm-ups, but also on The Simpsons, Hank Azaria is practically a third of the cast, and he's made a point of talking about there have been scenes where it's just him having a conversation with himself as 3 or 4 different people.
So yeah, and I think one time you told me like there was a character, I think of a female artist that was like the one
Tress
that
MacNeil.
yes.
Tress
Talk
MacNeil.
about her.
Her range, both vocally and acting-wise, are just out of this world. If
Yeah.
she wants you to think that she is like a very young little boy, done. If she needs to sound like a crazy old cat lady, done. If she wants to sound like the news presenter, but who also happens to be like losing her mind because of some sort of like alien takeover or like brain slugs or whatever, look
Done.
no further. It's insane. She can do so many different types of characters, and even within each character has such a range of again just like acting and styles that she can incorporate, that she does not get the credit that I feel like she really deserves. Which again, she also got sort of like the biggest help, I think, from The Simpsons. And she also went on, she was all over Futurama as well. Again, I really think I look to Futurama as one of my absolute favorites for as far as voice casts go, because again, you've got your Billy West, you've also got Maurice LaMarche, who some of his earlier work, he was Brain in Peaky and the Brain, and then he was like Kiff. So again, he also can sound like a giant, 10-foot tall lizard alien, and he can also sound like a weird, creepy little, like just human or whatever.
Mouse.
and he's also, both Billy and Maurice do some amazing spot on impersonations. Whereas again, I feel like Tress MacNeil, who again also in Futurama, she's far more of a purely original type of character person. Not that she never did some impersonations of celebrities and characters if the show ever brought actual pop culture people into the script, but she was all the more, again, just almost like as dynamic as both of those guys, if not more so. Yeah, that's like my go-to. That really is like people. Yeah, like yes, the cast from The Simpsons, they all do a great job. But for me, it's just something about the cast of Futurama. That one really gets me.
Yeah, is there? I guess.
Oh,
just
and
jump ball.
John DiMaggio.
I was about to say, I was like, jump
Bender.
ball. Is there anybody else we're missing that was an inspiration?
Probably John DiMaggio. That's probably it as far as like the bigger names that aren't just in like one or two like video games, just video game actors.
Oh yeah, just give us a couple gaming ones then.
I mean, yeah, you've got like your Troy Bakers.
Love Troy Baker, David Hayter.
Yeah, Meryl.
I put that. I don't know if you ever listen. Just like Marvel movies, I sometimes edit in post-credit little Easter eggs, and your Meryl was. I put that in. I think I want to say the Giger episode, something like that. So look out for those as well. But yeah, anybody else?
That's funny. Actually, I did not know about that. I can see her actual like face, not just like some of the characters she's done, but I feel so bad I'm blank. It's actually somebody else who was in
what's some of her work?
She's actually Jennifer Hale. That's who it is. Okay. She was also in Metal Gear Solid, but she has been all over the freaking map. Again, tons and tons of video games. Yeah, I believe so. I think she was Lady Shep. Which again, if my internet's of course being really poopy right now, but we're doing this through the internet, so I don't want to try too hard. But yeah, she was Lady Shep. She's been in like actual movies and stuff, like Ralph Breaks the Internet. She's just she's iconic, but again, is so talented and has such range that she's done. It's almost hard to pick just one or two things that anyone would know. It's always going to be niche because again, she's been doing voice work since the mid 90s, and she's got like
Wow.
easily 200 credits to her name or something. It's
Wow.
nuts. And again, talking about not just video games, like cartoons, movies, tons of animation, but she is like an animation voiceover legend.
Well, Philip, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate your interest in the craft. I think that's definitely one of the things that always kind of lent itself to our, just the fun working relationship. And finally, also just like turning off the sort of ridiculous puns and sense of humor stuff, and just really getting
We
to.
got serious.
I
Yeah.
know, right? Yeah, of just
Yeah.
like not looking for a joke to crack, but really just kind of explaining to people with, again, just this is still like bird's eye. There's going to be tons of things that I missed. Like,
No, I think this is a good
it's going to be a great way
so
to scratch the surface and pique the interest of people, I hope. But there's so much more that you could really talk about, and it's one. And again, I think that's a lot of why it keeps me so passionate. That, like I said earlier, there's always so much more to learn, and then you find a new, you know, hero and somebody else that you didn't realize has been voicing some of your favorite people from the last 20 to 30 years, and it's just such a cool place to be.
I think the art, well, like any art, it's a long rabbit hole, right? And I think the art that is voiceover, acting, and narration, I really felt like we gave it a good, well-rounded analysis through your career.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier to understand some of these things when we're talking to the person behind them. So thank you again for joining us. I want to thank you guys for listening, of course. Now, before we go, we don't have gems. Now, don't worry. I know what you're thinking. And no, Philip's not going to die or anything. He's going to be back on the show, and we're going to continue to talk about our favorite things. But like I said in the intro, it's time we start putting some spotlights on our contemporaries. But until next time, a couple of things. This episode was brought to you by the Entropy Sessions and our go-to tool for remote podcast recordings. That's Zencaster. With Zencaster, you can record separate audio and video tracks, and it's all backed up on a secured cloud, so you never lose your hard work. Even better, it's easy to use, and there's nothing to download. So go to zen.ai/Art of the Beholder, or just use promo code Art of the Beholder and get 30% off your first 3 months with a pro account. If you like any of the things we talk about, of course, you can check out our work at novodayproductions.com. You can like, subscribe, do all the things. If you want to sponsor our little love child, or you want to be on the show, you can reach out to our business management team at novodaymedia@gmail.com. And you know what to do. Until next time, be good to each other. And as always, good luck and Godspeed. We love you.
Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Novo Day Productions. Created and hosted by Novo Day and the Novo Day Collective. Facebook.com/Novo Day Media, @Novo Day Media on Twitter and Instagram. Music by A Company. Facebook.com/ACOMusic123. ACO on Spotify. Logo design by Tom Justice, JESTUS, of thejusticecompany.com. And executively produced by Clayton Anderson. All rights reserved.
Tommy Teach'em, Neato.